They say that in the darkness of space, death is silent. No screams echo through the vacuum. No final words carry on the solar winds. But the Zephyrian Empire learned something different when they made their fatal mistake. They discovered that while death itself might be silent, the response of those who refuse to let death win can shake entire star systems. Dr. Sarah Chen had saved over 3,000 lives during her service aboard the medical frigate Hippocrates. Humans, aliens, enemy combatants, it didn't matter to her. The Hippocratic Oath knew no species, no borders, no politics. When the Red Cross appeared on her ship's hull, it meant sanctuary. It meant hope. It meant someone cared enough to risk everything to pull you back from the edge of oblivion. The Zephyrians saw that Red Cross differently. They saw it as a target. What happened next would be whispered about in the dark corners of the galaxy for generations. Not because of what the Zephyrians did, war crimes sadly were nothing new, but because of what humanity did in response. Because when you touch their healers, when you break the sacred trust that keeps civilization civilized, you don't just anger humanity. You awaken something far worse. You awaken the Reapers. The medical frigate Hippocrates drifted through the Kepler Nebula like a beacon of hope in the cosmic darkness. Its pristine white hull bore the universal symbol of medical neutrality, a red cross that had meant sanctuary for over 800 years of human space travel. Sarah Chen pressed her palm against the observation deck's viewport, watching the swirling purple and gold gases of the nebula dance around distant stars. Another quiet day in paradise, she murmured to herself, though she knew better than to trust the calm. The Terran-Zephyrian War had been raging for 3 years now, and quiet days were often followed by the most devastating storms. Behind her, the soft hum of medical equipment filled the corridor. The Hippocrates was one of 12 hospital ships in the Human Medical Corps, each one a marvel of engineering and compassion. Its bioregeneration chambers could regrow limbs in hours. Its surgical suites could perform operations impossible on planetary surfaces, and its staff could work miracles that would have been considered magic just centuries before. Sarah turned from the viewport as her wrist communicator chimed. Dr. Chen to Medical Bay 7 came the voice of Lieutenant Torres, her head nurse. "On my way," Sarah replied, already moving through the pristine corridors. The walls were lined with soft blue lighting that automatically adjusted to maintain optimal circadian rhythms for the ship's multi-species crew. Humans worked alongside Altarians, whose forearms made them exceptional surgeons, and Deneb healers, whose empathic abilities helped manage patient trauma. Medical Bay 7 housed their most critical cases. As Sarah entered, she found Torres monitoring a young Zephyrian soldier, barely out of adolescence by their species standards. His pale blue skin was marked with the geometric tattoos that indicated his home colony, and his breathing was shallow but steady. "Found him drifting in an escape pod 6 hours ago," Torres reported, her weathered face showing the strain of another 18-hour shift. "Ship registry indicates he was aboard the ZES Vanguard. Plasma burns to 60% of his body, severe dehydration, and what looks like radiation poisoning." Sarah nodded, pulling up the patient's readings on her tablet. The Zephyrians were humanoid but with several key differences. Their blood was copper-based rather than iron, giving it a distinctive green color, and their organs were arranged differently than human anatomy. Still, 3 years of war had taught human medics how to treat their former enemies with the same care they gave their own wounded. "Any identification?" Sarah asked, beginning her examination of the unconscious soldier. "Just this," Torres handed her a small crystal pendant, the kind Zephyrian mothers gave their children before they left for war. It pulsed with a faint inner light, still connected to its mate somewhere across the galaxy, letting a family know their son still lived. Sarah felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came with treating enemy combatants, not anger or resentment, but a deep sadness at the waste of it all. This boy, and he was barely more than a boy, should have been studying at some Zephyrian university or learning a trade from his father. Instead, he was here, broken and alone, light years from home. "Begin treatment protocol 7, she instructed. "Full bioregeneration therapy and cellular reconstruction. I want him stable within 12 hours. Doctor," Torres hesitated, lowering her voice. "Command won't be happy." Our medical supplies are already strained and using full regen on an enemy soldier. Sarah met her nurse's eyes with a steady gaze. Since when do we choose who deserves to live based on the uniform they wear? The Hippocratic Oath doesn't have a citizenship requirement, Lieutenant. Torres smiled, the expression transforming her tired features. Just checking to make sure you're still the same doctor who told Admiral Morrison where he could stick his strategic medical priorities memo. That memo suggested we should prioritize human casualties over alien ones, Sarah replied, beginning to set up the bioregeneration chamber. Any officer who can't understand why that's fundamentally wrong doesn't deserve to wear the uniform. The next few hours passed in the familiar rhythm of emergency medicine. Sarah worked alongside her team, monitoring the young Zephyrian's progress as advanced human medical technology began repairing damage that would have been fatal just decades before. The bioregeneration matrix rebuilt damaged tissue at the cellular level, while specialized nanobots cleared radiation from his bloodstream. During her brief break, Sarah made her way to the ship's central hub where the Hippocrates captain, Maria Santos, was reviewing tactical displays with her senior staff. Santos was a career medical officer who had commanded hospital ships for 15 years, and her reputation for protecting medical neutrality was legendary throughout human space. "How's our unexpected guest?" Santos asked without looking up from the holographic star map floating above the central table. "Stable," Sarah reported. "He'll make a full recovery." "Any word on where he came from?" Santos gestured to the tactical display, where the wreckage of several ships showed as red dots against the stellar background. Long-range sensors picked up the aftermath of a battle in the Proxima system. "Looks like a Zephyrian patrol ran into one of our hunter-killer groups. No survivors detected, which means this kid was the only one who made it out." Sarah studied the display, noting the positions of the wrecked vessels. The battle had been fierce but brief. Human ships were generally faster and more maneuverable, while Zephyrian vessels relied on heavy armor and overwhelming firepower. When the two doctrines met, the results were usually decisive. "Any chance his family knows he's alive?" she asked. "That pendant you found?" Santos smiled sadly. "Those crystals have a range of about 50 light-years. His family crystal went dark when the battle began. As far as they know, their son is dead." The weight of that knowledge settled on Sarah's shoulders like a familiar burden. This was the hidden cost of war that no one talked about. Not just the soldiers who died, but the families who mourned for loved ones who might still be alive. The mothers and fathers who would never know their children were safe because war made communication impossible. "When he's stable enough, we'll arrange for prisoner exchange," Santos continued. "The usual protocols through the neutral zone." Sarah nodded, but something nagged at her. The war had been escalating recently, with both sides becoming more desperate and more ruthless. Reports had been filtering in about increased attacks on civilian targets, violations of established warfare protocols, and breakdown of the prisoner exchange systems that had kept some semblance of civilization in the conflict. Her contemplation was interrupted by the ship's communication array crackling to life. The voice that emerged was distorted by static and interference, but unmistakably human. "Mayday, Mayday. This is the cargo vessel Prosperity requesting immediate medical assistance. We have multiple casualties and are under attack." "Repeat. We are under attack and require immediate medical evacuation." Santos was already moving toward the communication station. "This is Captain Santos of the hospital ship Hippocrates. What is your position and status?" "Captain, thank God," the voice replied, relief evident despite the static. "We're in the Vega system. Coordinate 77 Mark 42. Zephyrian raiders hit us without warning. They're gone now, but we have 15 crew members with severe injuries. Please, we need help." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. The Vega system was only 6 hours away at maximum warp, well within their operational range. But something felt wrong about the transmission. "Prosperity. This is Medical Officer Chen. Can you provide details about the nature of the injuries?" "Doctor, we have plasma burns, decompression injuries, possible radiation exposure. 3 crew members are in critical condition. We have basic medical supplies, but nothing that can handle trauma of this magnitude." Santos was already issuing orders to her navigation officer. "Set course for Vega system. Maximum warp. Medical teams prepare for mass casualty reception." As the Hippocrates changed course, Sarah returned to Medical Bay 7 to check on her Zephyrian patient. The young soldier was responding well to treatment, his vital signs stable and his tissue regeneration proceeding ahead of schedule. In a few days, he would be as healthy as he had ever been. She touched the crystal pendant that lay on the bedside table, feeling its warmth against her fingers. Somewhere across the galaxy, a family was mourning their son, not knowing he was safe aboard a human hospital ship. The irony wasn't lost on her. They were rushing to help humans who had been attacked by Zephyrians, while simultaneously saving the life of a Zephyrian soldier. Dr. Chen to the bridge. Captain Santos's voice echoed through the ship's communication system. Sarah made her way to the bridge, where she found Santos staring at the main view screen with a troubled expression. The swirling gases of the Kepler Nebula were falling away behind them as the hypocrites streaked toward the Vega system at faster-than-light speeds. "What's our ETA?" Sarah asked. 5 hours, 43 minutes, Santos replied. "But we're picking up some strange readings on long-range sensors. No other ships in the area, which is odd for a major shipping lane." Sarah frowned. The Vega system was indeed one of the busiest commercial routes in human space, a natural waypoint for vessels traveling between the core worlds and the frontier colonies. For it to be completely empty except for one damaged cargo ship was highly unusual. Could be a coincidence, she suggested, though her instincts were telling her otherwise. Maybe, Santos agreed, but her tone suggested she shared Sarah's concerns. "I've sent a priority message to Sector Command, letting them know about the rescue operation." Standard procedure. The next few hours passed slowly as the medical teams prepared for the incoming casualties. Sarah supervised the preparation of trauma bays, ensuring that bio-regeneration chambers were prepped and that surgical suites were ready for immediate use. The ship's alien medical staff worked alongside their human colleagues, their different perspectives and abilities making them invaluable in complex emergency situations. Dr. Kethvar, the ship's chief Altarian surgeon, approached Sarah as she was reviewing treatment protocols. His forearms moved in the complex gesture that served as his species' equivalent of a concerned expression. "Dr. Chen," he said in his precisely modulated English, "I have been monitoring communications from the Vega system. The distress signal from the Prosperity has ceased entirely." Sarah looked up from her tablet. "Equipment failure?" "Perhaps," Kethvar replied, his large dark eyes reflecting uncertainty. "However, I find it curious that a ship with 15 critically injured crew members would not maintain constant communication with their rescue vessel." Before Sarah could respond, the bridge communication system activated again. "All senior staff to the bridge immediately." Captain Santos's voice carried an urgency that made Sarah's blood run cold. She and Kethvar rushed to the bridge, where they found Santos and her senior officers gathered around the main sensor display. The tactical plot showed their position relative to the Vega system, now only 2 hours away. "Report," Sarah said as she approached the command station. Santos's face was grim. "Long-range sensors are picking up multiple ship signatures in the Vega system. Configuration suggests a Zephyrian battle group. At least 6 vessels, including 2 heavy cruisers." Sarah felt ice form in her stomach. "The Prosperity? No sign of her," Santos replied. "Either she's been destroyed or..." She let the implication hang in the air. "It's a trap," Sarah said quietly. Santos nodded. "That's what I'm thinking. The question is, what do we do about it?" The bridge fell silent as everyone considered the implications. Hospital ships were protected under galactic warfare conventions. Attacking medical vessels was considered a war crime of the highest order, but conventions and reality were often two very different things. "We continue on course," Sarah said firmly. Santos turned to look at her. "Sarah, if this is a trap, then we spring it," Sarah interrupted. "If there really are injured people in that system, we have an obligation to help them. And if it's a trap, then we show the Zephyrians what happens when they violate medical neutrality. With respect, Doctor, we're a hospital ship, not a warship. We have defensive capabilities, but against a full battle group." Sarah moved to the tactical display, studying the enemy ship positions. "How long until we reach the system?" 1 hour, 57 minutes, the navigation officer reported. "Then we have time to prepare," Sarah said. Captain, I recommend we go in with full medical protocols in effect. Make it clear we're operating under medical neutrality. If they attack us anyway, Santos completed the thought, then they'll have committed a war crime in front of the entire galaxy. The political ramifications alone would be enormous. More than that, Sarah added, they'll have proven that medical neutrality no longer exists in this war. And once that happens, the rules change for everyone. Santos studied the tactical display for a long moment, then made her decision. All hands, this is the captain. We are approaching what may be a hostile situation. Medical neutrality protocols are now in effect. All crew members are to conduct themselves according to galactic medical conventions. We are healers first, and we will not abandon our duty because of threats or intimidation. As the hypocrites continued toward what might be its doom, Sarah returned to Medical Bay 7-1 last time. The young Zephyrian soldier was awake now, his pale blue eyes tracking her movements as she approached his bed. "Doctor," he said in accented but clear English. "Where am I?" Sarah pulled up a chair beside his bed. "You're aboard the human hospital ship Hippocrates. You were found in an escape pod after a battle. Your injuries were severe, but you're going to be fine." The soldier's eyes widened with surprise and confusion. "Human ship? But we are at war." "Not in here," Sarah replied gently. "In here, you're just a patient who needed help. That's all you need to be." The soldier stared at her for a long moment, then looked down at his hands. "My ship? My friends, I'm sorry," Sarah said softly. "You were the only survivor we found." Tears began to flow down the soldier's face, green tears that reflected the copper in his blood. Sarah reached out and took his hand, offering what comfort she could to someone who had lost everything. "What happens to me now?" he asked. "You heal," Sarah replied. "You get better, and then we arrange for you to go home to your family." "They think I'm dead," the soldier whispered. "Then you'll have quite a story to tell them about human hospitality," Sarah said with a smile. As alarms began to sound throughout the ship, indicating their approach to the Vega system, Sarah squeezed the young soldier's hand one more time. "Whatever happens next," she told him, "remember that some things are more important than war." The Hippocrates dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Vega system, and immediately every screen on the ship lit up with targeting solutions as 6 Zephyrian warships powered up their weapons and began closing on the lone hospital ship. The bridge of the Hippocrates became a symphony of controlled tension, as 6 Zephyrian warships arranged themselves in a hunting formation around the hospital ship. Captain Santos stood at the center of it all, her hands clasped behind her back, projecting the calm authority that had carried her through 15 years of commanding medical vessels in war zones. "Communications, open a channel on all frequencies," Santos ordered. "This is Captain Maria Santos of the human hospital ship Hippocrates, operating under Article 12 of the Galactic Medical Convention. We are responding to a distress call and request safe passage to render medical assistance." The response came immediately, broadcast across all channels, so there would be no ambiguity about what was happening. The voice was mechanically translated from Zephyrian, but the contempt was unmistakable. "Human vessel, you are in violation of Zephyrian territorial space. Submit to boarding and inspection or face the consequences." Sarah Chen felt her jaw clench as she watched the tactical display. The Zephyrian ships were moving into an attack formation, their weapon systems charging but not yet locked onto the Hippocrates. They were giving the medical ship a chance to comply, which suggested this wasn't just a random act of aggression. "Sir," the communications officer called out, "I'm detecting multiple recording devices among the Zephyrian ships. They're documenting everything." Santos and Sarah exchanged glances. If the Zephyrians were recording the encounter, it meant they planned to use whatever happened here for propaganda purposes. The question was what story they intended to tell. "Captain," Sarah said quietly, moving closer to the command chair, "we can't let them board. If they find our Zephyrian patient," Santos nodded grimly. "Hospital ships were supposed to be neutral ground, but the young soldier in Medical Bay 7 was technically a prisoner of war. If the Zephyrians discovered him, they could claim the Hippocrates was violating its neutral status by harboring their personnel." Zephyrian vessels, Santos broadcast, We are operating under medical neutrality and have no military personnel or equipment aboard. We request safe passage to continue our humanitarian mission." This time, the response was different. A new voice came across the communication channel, older and carrying the authority of high rank. "I am Admiral Kethmore of the Zephyrian Imperial Navy. You will submit to boarding immediately. Any resistance will be considered an act of war." Sarah recognized the name. Admiral Kethmore was known throughout the galaxy as a hardliner, a military commander who believed that victory justified any means necessary. If he was personally involved in this encounter, it meant the stakes were higher than a simple territorial dispute. "Admiral," Santos replied, her voice steady despite the danger they faced, "I remind you that attacking medical vessels is a violation of galactic law. We are prepared to comply with legitimate inspection requests, but we cannot allow armed boarding parties aboard a hospital ship." "Your compliance is not required, Captain. Only your cooperation." The tactical display suddenly exploded with activity as all 6 Zephyrian ships locked weapons onto the hypocrites. Warning alarms began to sound throughout the medical vessel as automated systems detected the targeting solutions. "They're powering weapons," the tactical officer reported. "All ships are showing hostile intent." Santos moved to her command chair, her mind racing through options that were rapidly disappearing. Hospital ships carried only minimal defensive capabilities, shield generators and point defense systems designed to protect against space debris and minor threats. Against 6 military vessels, they were essentially helpless. "Medical teams prepare for possible boarding action," Santos announced over the ship's communication system. "All non-essential personnel to emergency stations. This is not a drill." Sarah felt her heart pounding as she watched the enemy ships close in. Around the bridge, the crew worked with professional efficiency, but she could see the fear in their eyes. They had all heard the stories of what happened to medical personnel who fell into enemy hands. "Captain," the communications officer called out urgently, "I'm receiving a transmission on emergency medical frequency. It's from the cargo vessel Prosperity." "Put it through," Santos ordered. The voice that emerged from the speakers was weak, filled with pain and desperation. "This is Captain Rodriguez of the Prosperity. Please, if anyone can hear this, they have us. The Zephyrians are using us as bait. Don't come here. It's a trap. They're going to go to..." The transmission cut off abruptly, replaced by Admiral Kethmore's cold voice. "As you can see, Captain Santos, your people are already here. The question is whether you will condemn them to death through your stubbornness, or save their lives through cooperation." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of impossible choices. The Zephyrians had indeed captured the Prosperity, and were using her crew as leverage to force the hypocrites to comply. But compliance meant allowing armed soldiers aboard a hospital ship, violating every principle of medical neutrality. "Sir," the tactical officer reported, "the lead Zephyrian vessel is launching boarding pods. Raise shields," Santos ordered. "Prepare for defensive action." The boarding pods were sleek armored craft designed to pierce through enemy hulls and disgorge soldiers directly into hostile vessels. As they approached the hypocrites, the hospital ship's point defense systems came online, filling space with controlled bursts of energy designed to intercept the incoming threats. 2 of the pods were destroyed immediately, their crews lost to the vacuum of space. But the remaining 4 reached the hypocrites and attached themselves to the hull like metallic parasites. Within moments, cutting beams began slicing through the medical ship's armor plating. "Hull breaches on Deck 7, 9, and 12, the damage control officer reported. "Emergency force fields are holding, but they're cutting through." Sarah ran from the bridge toward the nearest breach point, where security personnel were already taking defensive positions. The Hippocrates carried a small security detachment, but they were trained primarily for crowd control and protecting medical personnel, not for repelling military boarding actions. The first hull breach opened with a shower of sparks and molten metal. Through the glowing hole came Zephyrian soldiers in full combat armor, their weapons sweeping the corridor as they advanced. The hospital ship's security team opened fire immediately, their energy weapons filling the corridor with deadly light. But the Zephyrian soldiers were experienced combat veterans, and they moved with the precision of troops who had conducted dozens of similar operations. Within minutes, they had secured their beachhead and were advancing deeper into the ship. Sarah pressed herself against a bulkhead as soldiers ran past her position, their boots ringing against the metal decking. She could hear similar battles taking place throughout the ship, as the other boarding parties fought their way through the Hippocrates defenses. Her communicator chirped with an urgent message from Dr. Kethvar in Medical Bay 7. Dr. Chen, they are coming toward the medical section. The patient. What should we do? Sarah's mind raced. If the Zephyrians found their wounded soldier, they could claim the hospital ship was harboring military personnel. It would give them the excuse they needed to justify whatever they planned to do next. Move him to Emergency Medical Station 3, she ordered. Change his identification. Make him look like a human casualty from the Prosperity. Understood, Kethvar replied. Sarah began making her way toward the medical section, staying in maintenance corridors to avoid the fighting that was spreading throughout the ship. The sounds of battle echoed through the bulkheads. Energy weapon discharges, shouted orders in multiple languages, the distinctive whine of emergency force fields under stress. She reached Medical Bay 7 just as Kethvar and Lieutenant Torres were transferring the young Zephyrian soldier to a portable treatment unit. The soldier was awake but groggy from the medications, his blue-green skin pale with fear. What's happening? He asked in his accented English. Your people are taking over our ship, Sarah replied grimly. We're trying to keep you safe. The soldier's eyes widened with understanding. They find me here, you get in trouble. That's our problem, not yours, Sarah said firmly. Right now, you're our patient, and we protect our patients. They moved quickly through the ship's corridors, using medical transport routes that were designed to avoid main thoroughfares. Behind them, they could hear the Zephyrian soldiers methodically searching the medical bays, their heavy footsteps and harsh voices growing closer. Emergency Medical Station 3 was located in a secondary hull section, originally designed as a backup facility in case the main medical bays were damaged in combat. It was smaller and less well-equipped, but it would serve their purpose. As they settled the young soldier into a treatment bed, Sarah's communicator crackled with Captain Santos's voice. All department heads to the main conference room immediately. We are entertaining guests. Sarah looked at Kethvar and Torres. Stay with him, she instructed. If anyone asks, he's a human crew member injured in a training accident. His identification is in the computer under the name James Patterson. Doctor, the young Zephyrian said quietly. Why are you doing this? Why risk everything for enemy soldier? Sarah paused at the doorway. Because that's who we are, she said simply. It's who we choose to be. The main conference room had been transformed into an interrogation center. Admiral Kethmore stood at the head of the table, flanked by heavily armed soldiers. Captain Santos sat across from him, her senior staff arranged around the polished surface that had once hosted medical conferences and humanitarian planning sessions. Admiral Kethmore was an imposing figure, even by Zephyrian standards. His pale blue skin was marked with the ceremonial scars that indicated high military rank, and his dark eyes held the cold intelligence of a career military officer who had survived decades of interstellar conflict. Chen, he said as Sarah entered the room, I have been looking forward to meeting you. Your reputation precedes you. Sarah took her seat without responding, meeting the Admiral's gaze with steady eyes. Around the table she could see her colleagues, Captain Santos, Kethvar, Chief Engineer Martinez, and others, all projecting the same calm professionalism that had carried them through years of medical service. I understand you have questions about our mission here, Captain Santos said formally. As I stated earlier, we are operating under medical neutrality and responding to a distress call. Admiral Kethmore smiled, an expression that held no warmth. Indeed, the distress call from the Prosperity. Tell me, Captain, how many of her crew are you expecting to treat? 15 casualties, according to the transmission, Santos replied. Interesting. The Admiral gestured to one of his subordinates, who activated a holographic projector in the center of the table. The image that appeared showed the interior of what was clearly a cargo ship, but instead of injured crew members, it showed Zephyrian soldiers standing guard over a handful of human prisoners. The Prosperity has a crew of 8, Admiral Kethmore continued conversationally, all of whom are healthy and uninjured. The distress call was, shall we say, scripted. Sarah felt cold anger building in her chest. The entire rescue mission had been an elaborate trap, designed to lure the Hippocrates into Zephyrian space where it could be captured or destroyed. "Admiral," she said carefully, "what exactly do you want from us?" Kethmore's smile widened. "An excellent question, Doctor. What I want is very simple. I want to send a message to the human government about the true nature of this war, about the price of resistance." He moved around the table, his hands clasped behind his back in a gesture that reminded Sarah uncomfortably of her old medical school instructors. But there was nothing academic about the menace in his voice. "You humans have this curious notion that war can be civilized," he continued. "That there are rules that must be followed, conventions that must be observed. You believe that medical personnel should be protected, that hospital ships are somehow sacred." Sarah exchanged glances with Captain Santos. The direction of this conversation was becoming increasingly clear and increasingly terrifying. "Admiral," Santos interjected, "the Galactic Medical Convention has been in effect for over 2 centuries. It has been signed and ratified by every major power, including the Zephyrian Empire." "Conventions," Kethmore said dismissively, "are agreements between civilized species. But this war has moved beyond civilization, Captain. When your people began their campaign of expansion into our territory, when they refused our generous offers of coexistence, they chose to abandon the civilized path. Our expansion?" Sarah couldn't help herself. "Admiral, human colonies in this sector were established over 50 years ago. We were here first." Kethmore's eyes fixed on her with laser intensity. "Were you, Doctor? Were you really? Or is that simply another human lie? Another justification for your species' endless hunger for resources and territory?" The holographic display changed, showing star charts and territorial boundaries. Sarah recognized the disputed systems that had sparked the current war, border regions where human and Zephyrian interests had clashed over mining rights and trade routes. "The truth," Kethmore continued, "is that your species recognizes no authority but its own will. You take what you want and justify it afterward with laws and conventions that serve your interests. Well, Doctor, today those conventions end." Captain Santos stood up slowly, her face pale but determined. "Admiral, if you're planning to attack medical personnel, I must warn you that such actions will have severe consequences. The human government will not tolerate." "The human government," Kethmore interrupted, "will do exactly what we tell them to do, because after today they will understand that their precious medical neutrality exists only at our sufferance." Sarah felt her blood turn to ice as the implications became clear. This wasn't just about capturing or destroying the Hippocrates, this was about breaking the fundamental conventions that kept war from becoming absolute barbarism. The Zephyrians were planning to make an example of them, to show the galaxy that even medical personnel were fair game. "You can't be serious," she said quietly. "The political ramifications alone would be enormous. Every neutral power in the galaxy would turn against you." "Would they?" Kethmore asked. "Or would they simply accept the new reality? War without limits, victory by any means necessary. You humans started this conflict, Doctor. We intend to finish it." The conference room fell silent except for the distant sounds of Zephyrian soldiers moving through the ship conducting their search. Sarah could only imagine what they would do if they found the young soldier hidden in Emergency Medical Station 3. "Admiral," Captain Santos said formally, "I hereby lodge an official protest against this violation of medical neutrality. My ship and crew are operating under the protection of galactic law." Kethmore laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Your protest is noted, Captain," and ignored. He moved to the conference room's main display screen, which showed the exterior view of space around the Hippocrates. The 6 Zephyrian warships had moved into a perfect firing formation, their weapons trained on the defenseless hospital ship. In exactly 1 hour, the Admiral announced, "This vessel will be destroyed with all hands. The official report will indicate that the Hippocrates was carrying military personnel and equipment in violation of medical neutrality, and that it opened fire on Zephyrian vessels when challenged." Sarah's heart pounded as she realized the full scope of the trap. Not only were they planning to murder everyone aboard the hospital ship, but they were going to frame it as a legitimate military action. The recordings they had been making would be edited to support their version of events. However, Kethmore continued, I am not unreasonable. I am prepared to offer you a choice, Captain Santos. Santos met his gaze steadily. What kind of choice? You may select 5 members of your crew to survive as witnesses to human treachery. 5 people who will be taken as prisoners and eventually returned to human space to tell the story of how their medical ship violated neutrality and fired on peaceful Zephyrian vessels. The room erupted in shocked voices as the implications sank in. The Admiral was offering them a choice between dying together or living with the knowledge that they had participated in a lie that would justify future attacks on medical personnel. I need an answer in 30 minutes, Kethmore stated. Choose carefully, Captain. The 5 you select will be the only ones who live to see their families again. As the Admiral and his guards left the conference room, Sarah looked around at her colleagues. These were people she had worked with for years, professionals who had dedicated their lives to saving others. Now they faced a choice that would haunt the survivors for the rest of their lives. But before anyone could speak, an alarm began sounding throughout the ship. The lights in the conference room flickered, and the artificial gravity fluctuated slightly. Captain Santos activated her communicator. Bridge report. The response came from Lieutenant Commander Hayes, the ship's second officer. Captain, we're detecting massive energy signatures on long-range sensors. Multiple ships dropping out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system. Sarah felt a spark of hope. Perhaps help was coming, perhaps Sector Command had received their distress signal and dispatched a rescue force. But Hayes's next words crushed that hope immediately. Sir, the new arrivals are broadcasting human identification codes, but their energy signatures, Captain, they're not showing up as any class of ship in our databases. Whatever they are, they're big and they're heavily armed. Through the conference room's viewports, Sarah could see new stars appearing in the distance, the bright engine flares of ships dropping out of faster-than-light travel. But something was wrong with the way they moved, the way their energy signatures registered on the ship's sensors. How many ships? Santos asked. That's just it, Captain, Hayes replied, his voice tight with confusion. We're reading 12 massive energy signatures. But visual confirms only shows 5 vessels. It's like they're cloaked, or using some kind of stealth technology we've never seen before. Admiral Kethmore's voice suddenly echoed through the ship's communication system, speaking in rapid Zephyrian to his own vessels. Sarah didn't understand the language, but the tone was unmistakably urgent. Within moments, the Admiral was back in the conference room, his composed demeanor replaced by obvious concern. Captain Santos, he said tersely, what human military units were you expecting in this system? Santos met his gaze calmly. We weren't expecting anyone, Admiral. Hospital ships operate independently. Kethmore studied her face for signs of deception, then activated his own communicator. The conversation that followed was in Zephyrian, but Sarah could recognize military terminology and tactical discussions. The Admiral's voice became increasingly agitated as the conversation continued. When he finished, Kethmore turned back to the human officers with an expression that combined anger and something that might have been fear. Captain, he said slowly, I suggest you contact these new arrivals and order them to withdraw immediately, because if they interfere with this operation, the consequences will be far more severe than the destruction of one hospital ship. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. There was something in the Admiral's voice that suggested he knew more about the approaching ships than he was letting on. Something that frightened even a hardened military commander who had been prepared to murder medical personnel. I told you, Santos replied steadily, we weren't expecting anyone. But if human ships are coming to investigate, I suggest you consider very carefully whether you want to be found in violation of medical neutrality. Kethmore's response was cut off as every screen in the conference room suddenly activated, showing the same image. A human face appeared on the displays, a face that Sarah didn't recognize, but which carried an authority that was unmistakable. This is Admiral Marcus Kane of the Terran Defense Force, the figure announced, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. Zephyrian vessels, you are in violation of the Galactic Medical Convention and are hereby ordered to withdraw immediately from the vicinity of the hospital ship Hippocrates. Admiral Kethmore's face went pale, his blue skin taking on an almost gray tinge. Sarah had never heard of Admiral Kane, but the Zephyrian's reaction suggested that he was well known to the enemy. Furthermore, Kane continued, Any hostile action against medical personnel will be considered an act of war against the Terran Confederation and will be met with overwhelming force. You have exactly 5 minutes to begin withdrawal from this system. The transmission ended, leaving the conference room in stunned silence. Through the viewports, Sarah could see the mysterious human ships moving closer, their massive forms becoming more visible as they approached. But it was Admiral Kethmore's reaction that truly frightened her. The confident military commander who had been prepared to murder an entire hospital ship crew was now visibly shaking, his dark eyes wide with what looked like genuine terror. "Admiral Kane," he whispered, almost to himself, "the Reapers have come." The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Reapers. Sarah Chen had never heard the term before, but the way Admiral Kethmore spoke it, with the kind of fear usually reserved for natural disasters or plague, told her everything she needed to know about humanity's response to the violation of medical neutrality. "Admiral," Captain Santos said carefully, studying the Zephyrian commander's obvious distress, "what exactly are Reapers?" Kethmore seemed to shake himself out of his momentary paralysis. His pale blue skin had taken on an almost gray pallor, and his hands trembled slightly as he activated his personal communicator. "Bridge, immediate tactical analysis of the approaching human vessels. I need full sensor sweeps and weapons status immediately." The response came in rapid Zephyrian, but Sarah could hear the tension in the bridge officer's voice, even without understanding the words. Whatever they were seeing on their sensors was clearly causing significant alarm among the Zephyrian fleet. "Captain Santos," Kethmore said, his voice carefully controlled but lacking the arrogant confidence it had held minutes before, "I strongly advise you to contact Admiral Kane and order him to withdraw. The situation here does not require his intervention." Before Santos could respond, every display screen in the conference room activated again. This time, instead of Admiral Kane's face, they showed the tactical situation around the Hippocrates. The 6 Zephyrian warships were clearly visible, but the approaching human vessels appeared as ghostly shadows on the sensors, their exact configurations unclear. Admiral Kane's voice filled the room again, but this time it carried a different tone. Colder, more final. "Admiral Kethmore," Kane began, and Sarah noticed the Zephyrian flinch at hearing his name spoken. "I see you've made yourself comfortable aboard a hospital ship. How very like you to hide behind medical personnel when facing superior force." Kethmore activated the communication system with shaking hands. "Admiral Kane, this is a legitimate military operation. The hospital ship was carrying contraband materials and—" "Admiral," Kane interrupted, his voice cutting through the Zephyrian's explanation like a blade. "I'm looking at detailed sensor logs from the past 2 hours. I know exactly what happened here. I know about the false distress signal, the captured cargo crew, and your little speech about ending medical neutrality." Sarah felt her blood run cold. Somehow, the approaching human fleet had been monitoring the entire situation. They had recordings of everything that had transpired aboard the Hippocrates. "What I want to know," Kane continued, "is whether you understand what you've done, whether you comprehend the line you've just crossed." Through the conference room's viewports, Sarah could see the mysterious human ships growing larger as they approached. Their configuration was unlike anything she had seen before. Sleek, angular vessels that seemed to bend light around their hulls, making them difficult to focus on directly. "Admiral Kane," Kethmore said, attempting to project authority he clearly no longer felt, "you are outnumbered 6-5. If you withdraw immediately, this incident can be resolved diplomatically." The laughter that came through the communication system was genuinely chilling. It held no humor, no warmth, just the sound of someone who found genuine amusement in another person's ignorance. 6-5? Kane repeated. "Admiral, you might want to have your sensor officer run a more detailed scan." Captain Santos had moved to the conference room's tactical display, where she was studying the readouts from the Hippocrates' own sensors. Her face had gone pale as she read the data. "Admiral Kethmore," she said quietly, "I think you need to look at this." The Zephyrian commander moved to the display, his eyes scanning the tactical information. As he read, his expression changed from concern to disbelief to outright terror. "That's impossible," he whispered. Sarah moved closer to see what had caused such a reaction. The tactical display showed the 5 visible human ships, but it also showed something else. energy signatures that suggested the presence of at least 20 additional vessels, their exact positions masked by some form of advanced stealth technology. 25 ships, Santos said quietly. Admiral Kethmore, you're not facing 5 human vessels. You're facing an entire battle fleet, but it was worse than that. As Sarah studied the energy readings, she realized that these weren't standard military vessels. The power outputs were enormous, far beyond anything she had seen in regular fleet actions. These ships had been built for one purpose: overwhelming destruction. Admiral Kane's voice returned, and this time it carried the weight of absolute certainty. Admiral Kethmore, you have made a fundamental error. You assumed that because your people have decided to abandon the conventions of civilized warfare, humanity would do the same. You were wrong. The main display changed, showing a view of human space near the war zone. Dozens of planets appeared on the star map, with shipping lanes and communication networks connecting them in a vast web of civilization. Every hospital ship, every medical station, every field clinic from here to Terra is now under my direct protection, Kane continued. Touch one more medic, threaten one more medical facility, and I will turn your homeworld into a monument to your poor judgment. Sarah had never heard anything like the cold certainty in Admiral Kane's voice. This wasn't the bluster of military posturing. It was a promise delivered with the absolute confidence of someone who had both the will and the capability to carry it out. Furthermore, Kane added, let me clarify something about medical neutrality, since you seem confused about the concept. Medical neutrality doesn't protect you from us, Admiral. It protects you from what we become when you violate it. The mysterious human ships had moved into formation around the Hippocrates, their positions carefully calculated to provide overlapping fields of fire while avoiding any danger to the hospital ship itself. Despite their advanced stealth systems, they were now close enough for visual identification. Sarah gasped as she got her first clear look at one of the vessels. It was massive. Easily twice the size of a standard battleship, but its design was unlike anything in the human fleet. The hull was matte black, adorned with markings that looked more ceremonial than military. Along its flanks, she could make out symbols that looked disturbingly like stylized skulls. My God, she whispered. What are those things? Captain Santos had been listening to reports from her own bridge crew, and her face had gone white as she processed the information. According to our sensors, she said quietly, each of those ships is carrying enough firepower to crack a planet. But that's not the worst part. Sarah looked at her commanding officer. What's the worst part? They're not showing up in any human fleet registry. Officially, they don't exist. Admiral Kethmore seemed to have reached the same conclusion. He was speaking rapidly into his communicator in Zephyrian, his voice carrying the desperate tone of someone trying to call for reinforcements. But even without understanding the language, Sarah could tell from the responses he was receiving that help was not coming. The communication system crackled to life again, but this time it wasn't Admiral Kane's voice. Instead, it was a recording audio logs from various Zephyrian military communications over the past several months. Target confirmed. Human medical frigate. No military escort. Proceed with attack plan. Medical station destroyed. No survivors. Mission accomplished. Human hospital ship requesting safe passage. Denied. Weapons free. The recordings went on, detailing attack after attack on human medical facilities. Sarah felt sick as she realized the scope of what the Zephyrians had been doing. They hadn't just violated medical neutrality. They had been systematically targeting medical personnel for months. Those recordings, Admiral Kane's voice returned, represent 18 separate attacks on medical facilities over the past 6 months. 47 doctors, 133 nurses, 26 medical technicians, and 68 patients murdered in direct violation of galactic law. Admiral Kethmore had stopped trying to call for help. Instead, he stood frozen at the tactical display, staring at the impossible readings from the human fleet. You want to know what Reapers are, Admiral? Kane continued. We're what happens when you make war on those who save lives. We're what humanity becomes when you force us to choose between civilization and survival. The largest of the human ships, a massive vessel that dwarfed even the Zephyrian heavy cruisers, moved closer to the Hippocrates. As it approached, its hull began to change, panels sliding away to reveal weapon systems that Sarah couldn't even begin to identify. Every doctor you killed, every nurse you murdered, every patient you let die. They have names, Admiral. They have families. And now they have Avengers. Sarah realized she was witnessing something unprecedented in human history. The Reapers weren't just a military unit. They were humanity's response to the systematic destruction of everything medical personnel held sacred. They were what happened when a species known for its mercy decided that mercy had failed. Admiral Kethmore. Kane's voice had dropped to barely above a whisper, but it carried through the communication system with perfect clarity. You have 30 seconds to release the medical personnel aboard the Hippocrates and surrender your fleet for war crimes prosecution. If you refuse, I will demonstrate exactly what happens when you touch our medic. The Zephyrian admiral looked around the conference room at the human officers watching him. Sarah could see the calculation in his eyes, weighing his options, trying to find some way out of the trap he had created for himself. Admiral Kane, he said finally, you're bluffing. Even the human government wouldn't authorize the kind of action you're suggesting. The political consequences. Admiral, Kane interrupted, let me clarify something for you. The Reaper fleet doesn't answer to the human government. We don't answer to the Terran Defense Force. We don't even answer to the Galactic Council. We answer to one authority and one authority only, the sacred trust that medical personnel will be protected in their mission to save lives. The implications of that statement hit Sarah like a physical blow. The Reaper fleet was operating outside normal military command structures, outside political oversight, outside the usual checks and balances that govern civilized warfare. They were accountable only to their own interpretation of medical neutrality. 20 seconds, Admiral. Kethmore activated his personal communicator again, but this time he wasn't calling for help. He was speaking to his own ships, and Sarah could hear the defeat in his voice even without understanding the words. What did he just order? Captain Santos asked. He told his ships to power down weapons and prepare to surrender, came a voice from the doorway. Sarah turned to see the young Zephyrian soldier standing there, supported by Dr. Kethvar and Lieutenant Torres. His face was pale, but his eyes were clear as he listened to his admiral's transmission. You shouldn't be here, Sarah said, moving toward him. If they see you, they already know I'm here, the soldier said quietly. Admiral Kethmore's sensors detected me hours ago. He was going to use me as evidence that this ship was violating neutrality. Admiral Kethmore turned to stare at the young soldier, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, the conference room was silent, except for the distant hum of the ship's systems. Private Catherine, the admiral said finally, using the soldier's name for the first time. You were reported dead. I was dying, the soldier replied. These humans saved my life. They risked everything to protect me, even though we're enemies. The admiral looked from his soldier to the human medical personnel, and Sarah could see something changing in his expression. The arrogant confidence was gone, replaced by something that might have been shame. Admiral Kane, Kethmore said into his communicator, I surrender my fleet to your authority. We will comply with all directives regarding the medical personnel. The response came immediately, but it wasn't what Sarah expected. Surrender rejected, Admiral. You don't understand what you've done here. You haven't just violated medical neutrality. You've destroyed it. After today, every medic in the galaxy will be a target. Every hospital ship will be fair game. Every medical facility will be considered a military objective. Sarah felt her heart sink as she realized the truth. The Zephyrian attack on the Hippocrates hadn't just been a war crime. It had been the end of medical neutrality itself. From this point forward, medical personnel would be combatants in any conflict, their protection dependent on military force rather than international law. So here's what's going to happen, Kane continued. You're going to return to your empire and deliver a message for me. You're going to tell them that medical neutrality is now under the exclusive protection of the Reaper fleet. Any attack on medical personnel, any violation of hospital ship neutrality, any threat to medical facilities will result in immediate and overwhelming retaliation. The largest human ship had moved even closer, and Sarah could now see details of its construction. The hull was covered in names, thousands upon thousands of them, etched in various languages and scripts. It took her a moment to realize what she was looking at. "Those are the names of every medical person killed in this war," she whispered. "The HMHS Hippocrates," Kane's voice continued, naming their ship, "will return to human space under escort. Her crew will be honored for their service and their sacrifice. But you, Admiral Kethmore, and your ships will carry a different message." Sarah watched as weapon systems aboard the human ships began to charge, energy readings climbing to levels that defied belief. But instead of targeting the Zephyrian vessels, they were aimed at empty space. "Fire," Kane ordered. The space around the Hippocrates erupted in a display of raw power that beggared imagination. Energy beams that could have destroyed planets lanced out into the void, striking pre-selected coordinates with precision that spoke of technology far beyond anything in the standard human arsenal. When the light faded, Admiral Kethmore's sensors showed the results. Written across the cosmic background in letters of pure energy, visible from anywhere in the system, was a single word: Reaper. "That message," Kane said quietly, "will remain visible for approximately 6 months, long enough for every ship that passes through this system to see it and understand what it means." Admiral Kethmore stared at the tactical display showing the energy signature burning across space like a brand. Sarah could see in his eyes the recognition that he had awakened something far more dangerous than any conventional military force. "Tell your empire," Kane continued, "that medical neutrality is no longer a matter of international law. It's now a matter of survival. Touch our medics and face the Reapers." As the human ships began to form an escort formation around the Hippocrates, Sarah realized that the war had just changed fundamentally. Medical neutrality would survive, but it would be protected by the kind of overwhelming force that made violations literally unthinkable. The young Zephyrian soldier moved to stand beside her as they watched the energy signature burning across space. "Doctor," he said quietly, "what have we done?" Sarah looked at him, then at the impossible display of power surrounding them. "We've learned," she said finally, "that there are some things humanity will not allow to be destroyed, no matter what the cost." The Reaper fleet had been born from the ashes of violated trust, forged in the fire of murdered medics, and tempered by the absolute determination that such violations would never happen again. As the Hippocrates began its journey home under the protection of humanity's angels of death, Sarah understood that they had witnessed the birth of something entirely new in galactic politics. Medical neutrality would survive, but it would survive under the protection of those who had chosen to become monsters so that healers could remain human. The Reapers had answered the call, and the galaxy would never be the same. The journey back to human space aboard the Hippocrates took 3 days, and during that time, Dr. Sarah Chen learned what it truly meant to be escorted by angels of death. The Reaper fleet moved through space with an almost supernatural precision, their black ships maintaining perfect formation around the hospital vessel, while their sensors swept constantly for any sign of threat. She had expected to feel relief at their rescue, but instead Sarah found herself grappling with questions that kept her awake during the ship's night cycle. The young Zephyrian soldier, who had officially become James Patterson in the ship's medical records, seemed to share her unease. "Doctor," he said during one of her visits to Emergency Medical Station 3, "the humans who came for you, they are not like other soldiers, are they?" Sarah checked his readings on the bioregeneration chamber, noting that his recovery was proceeding ahead of schedule. The plasma burns that had covered 60% of his body were now barely visible, and his radiation levels had dropped to normal ranges. "What makes you say that?" she asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. The soldier, she had learned his name was Kethryn, and he was barely 19 years old by human standards, gestured toward the viewport, where one of the massive Reaper ships was visible against the stars. "They move like death itself," he said quietly, "but death that chooses when to strike. My people have legends about such beings, spirits that become as monsters to protect what they love most." Sarah followed his gaze to the Reaper vessel. Even at rest, there was something unsettling about its configuration. The hull seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and the symbols etched along its flanks appeared to shift and change when viewed from different angles. "Kethryn," she said carefully, "what exactly did Admiral Kethmore mean when he recognized Admiral Kane? You seem to know who the Reapers were." The young soldier's expression became troubled. They are why this war began, Doctor. Though I think your people do not understand this. Sarah pulled up a chair beside his treatment bed. Explain. Kethrin was quiet for a long moment, his pale blue eyes reflecting the medical bay's soft lighting. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of knowledge that few on either side of the conflict possessed. 3 years ago, when the first border disputes began, there were incidents. Ships lost in deep space, entire colonies that went silent without explanation. My government blamed human expansion, said your people were conducting secret military operations against us. Sarah frowned. She remembered the early days of the conflict, when both sides had accused the other of mysterious attacks and unexplained disappearances. But it wasn't humans, was it? She asked. No, Kethrin shook his head. It was the hegemony, the machine intelligence from the Galactic Rim. They were testing our defenses, probing for weaknesses. But when the first attacks began, my military leaders saw an opportunity. They convinced the Empire that humans were responsible, that we needed to strike first before you could launch a full offensive. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The hegemony was a collection of artificial intelligences that had been expanding slowly into inhabited space for decades, consuming entire civilizations to fuel their growth. If they had been involved in starting the Terran-Zephyrian War, Admiral Kane discovered this truth 6 months ago. Kethrin continued. His intelligence agents uncovered evidence of hegemony involvement in the border incidents. But by then, the war had been raging for over 2 years. Too much blood had been spilled for either side to simply stop fighting. So he created the Reaper fleet, Sarah said, understanding beginning to dawn. More than that, Kethrin's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. He convinced your government to let him build the most devastating military force in known history, then made himself and his ships officially non-existent. The Reapers answer to no government, follow no political agenda, serve no national interest. They exist for one purpose only, to ensure that when the hegemony finally reveals itself, organic life will have protectors who are willing to do anything to preserve it. Sarah stared out at the black ships surrounding them, suddenly seeing them in an entirely different light. The Reapers weren't just protecting medical neutrality. They were preparing for a war that would determine the fate of all organic life in the galaxy. But why target medical personnel, she asked. Why break medical neutrality if they knew it would provoke this kind of response? Because medical personnel save lives without regard to species or politics, Kethrin replied. In the coming war against the machines, that unity will be essential. Admiral Kethmore and others like him believed that breaking medical neutrality would force humans to abandon their humanitarian principles, make them more ruthless and therefore more effective fighters. Sarah felt sick as the implications sank in. The attack on the Hippocrates hadn't been about military advantage. It had been about destroying the very qualities that made organic species worth defending. They were wrong, she said firmly. Yes, Kethrin agreed. But now Admiral Kane has been forced to reveal the Reapers before he was ready. The hegemony will know about them now. The war that was supposed to begin on humanity's terms will start on theirs. Before Sarah could respond, her communicator chimed with a priority message from Captain Santos. All senior staff to Conference Room 1. We have a distinguished visitor. Sarah made her way through the ship's corridors, noting that the atmosphere aboard the Hippocrates had changed significantly since their rescue. The crew moved with the quiet efficiency of people who had survived something that should have killed them, but there was also an underlying tension that hadn't been there before. Conference Room 1 had been restored to its original configuration, the signs of Zephyrian occupation erased by the ship's maintenance crews. Captain Santos stood at the head of the table, but she wasn't alone. Beside her stood a figure in a black uniform that Sarah didn't recognize, military in cut but bearing no insignia of rank or nationality. The man was older than she had expected from his voice, perhaps 60 years old, with gray hair and the kind of weathered features that spoke of decades in deep space. But it was his eyes that made Sarah catch her breath. They held the cold intelligence of someone who had made peace with doing terrible things for necessary reasons. Dr. Chen, Captain Santos said formally, "May I present Admiral Marcus Kane, commanding officer of the Reaper fleet." Kane extended his hand, and Sarah found herself shaking hands with one of the most dangerous human beings in the galaxy. "Doctor," Kane said, his voice carrying the same authority it had held during the confrontation with Admiral Kethmore. "Captain Santos has briefed me on your situation with the Zephyrian patient. I understand you risked considerable personal danger to protect him." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "He was a patient, Admiral. That's all that mattered." Kane smiled, and for a moment the cold intelligence in his eyes was replaced by something that might have been warmth. "That, Doctor, is exactly why the Reaper fleet exists, to protect people who think like you." He gestured for everyone to take their seats around the conference table. As they settled in, Sarah noticed that Kane moved with the careful precision of someone who was constantly aware of potential threats. "I'm sure you all have questions about what happened back there," Kane began, "and about what comes next. Let me start with the most important point. As of today, medical neutrality is under the exclusive protection of the Reaper fleet. Any attack on medical personnel will result in immediate and overwhelming retaliation." Doctor insisted. Kethvar raised one of his 4 hands. "Admiral, with respect, such protection requires resources and personnel that must be astronomical. How can you possibly monitor every medical facility in human space?" Kane's smile returned, but this time it held no warmth at all. "Doctor, you're thinking too small. We're not just protecting human medical facilities. As of today, the Reaper fleet is the guarantor of medical neutrality for all species in this spiral arm of the galaxy." The conference room fell silent, as the implications of that statement sank in. Sarah felt her breath catch as she realized the scope of what Kane was proposing. "All species?" Captain Santos asked carefully. "Every hospital ship, every medical station, every field clinic from the Terran Confederation to the Altarian Republic to the Zephyrian Empire itself," Kane confirmed. "Medical neutrality is now a universal principle, protected by force of arms rather than international law." Sarah found her voice. "Admiral, the logistics alone. How many ships would you need to enforce something like that?" Kane activated a holographic projector in the center of the table, and the image that appeared made Sarah's blood run cold. The display showed a 3-dimensional map of known space, with red dots indicating the positions of Reaper fleet vessels. There were hundreds of them, scattered throughout the galaxy, hidden in deep space, positioned at every major hyperspace junction and near every significant population center. The Reaper fleet wasn't just a military unit, it was a shadow navy that had been building in secret for years. "The fleet currently consists of 473 vessels," Kane said matter-of-factly, as if he were discussing the weather, "each one capable of engaging and destroying any known military force. We have the firepower to crack planets, Admiral Chen, and the will to use it if necessary." Chief Engineer Martinez leaned forward in his chair. "Admiral, forgive me, but the resources required to build and maintain a fleet of that size, where did they come from?" Kane's expression became grim. "From the 57 worlds that the hegemony has consumed over the past decade, Engineer. Every time they destroy a civilization, we salvage what we can and use it to build more Reapers. Their expansion provides the raw materials for their own eventual destruction." Sarah felt the room temperature seem to drop several degrees. The hegemony's expansion hadn't just been a distant threat, it had been the foundation for humanity's response. "Admiral?" she said quietly. "You're talking about building a military force powerful enough to wage war against artificial intelligence on a galactic scale. The political implications alone are irrelevant," Kane finished. "Doctor, organic life in this galaxy is facing extinction, not conquest, not subjugation, extinction. The hegemony doesn't negotiate, doesn't take prisoners, doesn't leave survivors. It consumes entire biospheres and converts them into more machines. Political considerations become meaningless when you're facing the end of all biological existence." The holographic display changed, showing surveillance footage from the rim worlds. Sarah watched in horror as massive mechanical constructs stripped entire planets bare, leaving behind nothing but barren rock and industrial complexes that stretched across continents. "This is what we're really fighting," Kane continued. "Not the Zephyrians, not territorial disputes, not political differences. This war between our species is just a distraction from the real threat. And every day we spend killing each other is another day the machines have to prepare." Captain Santos had been studying the tactical displays with the eye of an experienced fleet officer. Admiral, assuming you're right about the threat, why reveal the Reaper fleet now? Why not wait until you had more ships, more time to prepare? Kane's expression became bitter. Because Admiral Kethmore and his supporters forced my hand. By attacking medical personnel, by violating the conventions that keep organic species from destroying each other, they made it impossible to maintain the fiction that humans and Zephyrians could solve their differences diplomatically. He stood and moved to the conference room's viewport where the stars stretched away in all directions. The hegemony is watching, Dr. Chen. They're studying how we fight, how we organize, what our weaknesses are. Every atrocity committed in this war gives them more information about organic psychology. Every violation of civilized warfare makes us more like them, and therefore easier for them to predict and counter. Sarah joined him at the viewport, looking out at the black ships that moved through space like hunting predators. So you built the Reapers to preserve our humanity by becoming inhuman yourselves? She said. Kane turned to look at her, and for a moment she saw past the cold intelligence to the man underneath. Someone who carried the weight of impossible decisions and unthinkable responsibilities. We became monsters, he said simply, so that people like you could remain human. Because when the machines finally come, they'll need to face both our capacity for mercy and our willingness to show none at all. The conference room's communication system activated, carrying a message from the bridge. Captain Santos, we're receiving a priority transmission from Sector Command. They're requesting immediate communication with Admiral Kane. Kane moved back to the table and activated the communication array. The figure that appeared on the holographic display was Admiral Morrison, the same officer who had once tried to convince Sarah to prioritize human casualties over alien ones. Admiral Kane, Morrison said formally, I'm calling to inform you that the Terran Council has voted to officially recognize the Reaper fleet as an independent military organization. Your actions in the Vega system have been classified under Special Operations Directive 7. Kane's expression didn't change. Thank you for the notification, Admiral Morrison. Was there anything else? Morrison's image flickered slightly as he consulted something off-screen. Actually, yes. We're receiving reports that Zephyrian forces throughout the war zone are requesting immediate ceasefire negotiations. It seems your demonstration has had the desired effect. Sarah felt a moment of hope. If the war was ending, perhaps the galaxy could focus on preparing for the real threat. But Kane's response crushed that hope immediately. Tell them we'll consider ceasefire terms after they provide full disclosure about hegemony infiltration in their government. Until then, any attack on organic life will be met with Reaper response. Morrison's face showed surprise and concern. Admiral, are you saying the Zephyrians have been compromised by machine intelligence? I'm saying that this entire war has been orchestrated by artificial intelligence. And until we root out their influence in both governments, any peace agreement is meaningless. The transmission ended, leaving the conference room in stunned silence. Sarah looked around at her colleagues, seeing the same realization dawning in their eyes that had struck her. The war wasn't ending. It was just changing into something far more dangerous. Admiral, she said quietly, what do you need from us? Kane's smile returned, but this time it held genuine warmth. Continue being who you are, Doctor. Continue saving lives without regard to species or politics. Continue believing that organic life is worth preserving. He moved toward the door, then paused. And when the time comes, when the machines finally reveal themselves and the real war begins,